மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.
Hey guys, today's lesson will be dedicated to precise calculation. And for this lesson I chose one of my favorite endgames, which was played between Ranveer and Paul Keres. Let's begin. Alright, so we have position where both white and black have equal material, but we can clearly see that there is some activity going on for black. This is not exactly the position that I will be asking you a question. I just wanted you to show a beginning of how a certain position arose. So in this position, Paul Keres obviously played d5. Both pawns cannot take d5. If this pawn takes, we take the rook for free. If this pawn takes, we give check and skewer the rook. So it seems like that black is going to win the pawn right now. Perhaps Ranveer saw that and he had nothing else to do, so he played in this position g4 to support the pawn on f5. And there are several ways for black to continue, but what Keres did, he calculated something pretty deep and assessed this position as good for him. For example, he could have played in this position move like bishop c6. He could also play a move like d4 and then bishop c6, but he preferred to take on e4 with rook. And after rook takes e4, opponent take on d5. Maybe Ranveer thought that he wants to give this check and take the pawn, but instead Paul Keres took on g4 with the idea of bishop b5 check. So after take, check, king goes here, and bishop takes f1. And this is the position I actually want to talk to you about today. And I wrote evaluate position after bishop d3. Can black win pawn endgame after trade? So in this position, Ranveer did play bishop d3. And I would want you to calculate right now, should you trade the bishops or you should avoid trade and play with the bishop pawn endgame. Try to calculate just for 2 minutes and make up your mind. So you can go ahead and pause the video now. Alright, time is up. Now when white plays bishop d3, they offer a bishop trade, which will result an extra pawn for black on h-file. The only question is this pawn meaningful or useless? Because position would be very similar. But we have to see. Let's see what kind of a decision you made. After bishop d3, Keres took the bishop. And that was absolutely correct move. I'm not going to say that by avoiding the trade we will not win the game, but this is just a very forced win. So take, take. And a very long comment that I decided to leave, and I really liked it. This is a particularly interesting position. Black has an extra pawn, but since it is backward pawn on h7, it does not look all that valuable, as it seems unlikely to produce a passed pawn. Meanwhile, the white king is quite active in the center, and he has a passed pawn on d5 to set against black's passed c5 pawn. However, despite these first impressions, the h-pawn in fact turns out to be vital after all. There are two reasons. One is that it provides a reserve tempo with h7, h6, which can play a vital role in a king dance for the opposition. Secondly, there is also the potential tactical breakthrough with h5, should the black king be located within the square of the resulting white pass pawn after the reply g takes h5. I really like this comment. Very clearly explains that at some point when there's a Zugzwang position we want to pass the tempo, we will play h6, or we will play h5 to create a breakthrough here. One of those two we will use. So after king takes d3, question is, if you have calculated this, how black should proceed to win this endgame? Have you calculated this out? So in case you preferred not to trade bishop, this is of course all new for you, so you have to calculate right now. And even if you decided to trade the bishop, you have to calculate and see what kind of a position you get to start liking the position. For 2000 or 2200 and below level, it's almost impossible to calculate if I go backwards here all the way and see the win. It's very difficult. The point is gradually to reach the moment and make good decisions during the process. So right now, question is what black should do and what position black should get. Again, pause the video for 2-3 minutes and figure out next 3-4 best moves for black. Go ahead and pause the video now. Okay, so there are two reasonable moves. King b5 and king b6. One move draws, one move wins. I really hope you chose king b5. If you play king b6, you're losing a tempo. After king c4, you play a5, a4, and now black would be forced to expand his precious reserve tempo with h6. As will become clear later, the resulting position would only be a draw. The result position, if we're curious to see, play d6, here, d7, take, and take. This position is drawn, while with the pawn on h7, it's not drawn, and this is what we're gonna get. So how do we get that? We play king b5, force the a4 check, we provoke that move, and after king b6, king c4, we play a5. Now we have the same position as in the previous note, but with white to move. A crucial difference. Let's see if white could do something else. Let's say they don't go king c4 in this position and a5. Let's say they play king c3. In this case, everything is super easy. We just go king c7 and we just go king d6. So you wait, I come, you go, and I play a5. Or you go king c4, I go king d6, you play a5, and that's how I use my tempo. h6, and it's white to move now. After king moves away, I'll just take the pawn, and obviously it's winning. Let's go back. So seems like after king b6, white is forced to go king c4. We play a5, and white have to push the pawn. If they play king c3, super easy. Go back, up, take, and the easiest would be king c6 here. So this is very easy win. We're many tempos ahead. That doesn't work, and again, if king d3 here, it's the same position. King here, king there, and our tempo h6. After a5, white have to go d6. We come king c6. Again, only move d7, take and take. This is another very crucial position to understand that, of course, without this pawn, black is just losing now because white would just go and take. But it would be very hard for white king right now to simply come and take the pawn because of the second idea that black have is breakthrough by pushing h5. So let's think here. After king c5, what shall black do? We have two directions, king e7, king c7. If we play king c7 and black king goes king b5, we cannot go h5 because after take, we're only 3 moves away from promoting, and the king on c7 is too far to stop the pawn. This logical calculation tells us that our king should be on this side to prevent white pawn from promoting. So we go king e7, of course. Now it is clear that white king cannot go king b5 because of breakthrough h5. And after take g4, we all know very well the box rule. If white king cannot get into it, it's lost, while we are in the box of this pawn. So king will stop the pawn. Let's read this comment. The g pawn promotes, whilst the white h pawn is stopped by black's king. This is the key point of the whole ending and shows that black's extra h pawn is not the irrelevance it may have first seemed. The threat of h5 means that the white king is effectively held in an invisible prison, bounded by the square of the g5 pawn, and cannot go left off the c file or further forward than c5 square. So let's go back. This is invisible prison that the king always had to be in, because once pawn is pushed, it's a smaller box and king cannot get into it. Okay, no big deal, so king just stays on d5. And if we're going to go back and forth like this, we will just be in the same position. What should black do? Obviously we don't go back, and I think king f7, an easy move to figure out. What other moves black have? For example, if they go in this position h5, white will take, king f7, and right on time, white king will defend the pawn. King e4, king g7, king f3, king h6, and king g4. And that is the draw. So h5 was premature, because king is also within the box here to control any pawn promotion. So after king f7, we are now threatening h5. Say king stays here. We push h5, pawn takes, we go king g7, king e4, king h6, king f3, and we just take the pawn on h5. So after king f7, white king have to go to e4. And I wrote here, best moment in the game, how should black continue to win this game? Quickly you calculate that h5, I take, king g7, king f3, king h6, king g4 is not helping. So what would be the idea here? A very nice hint would be here, correspondence squares. I'm not sure if you know what it is, but you can figure this out. And I'm going to also show you how these correspondence squares work. So at this moment, spend 3 to 4 minutes, but don't just try to figure out this one move. Maybe it's obvious, but try to calculate till the end from this point on each variation how actually black can win this endgame. So, black to move, 3 to 4 minutes, go ahead and pause the video. Alright, I hope you spend good quality time. This is a very, very beautiful move. It absolutely defined what are those correspondence squares. Let me explain you right now. When we were on e7, the white king had to be on d5. When we are on f7, white king have to be on e4. If our king will go to g7, then white king have to go to f3 to be able to meet the threat of h5. So every time there is a comfortable square for white king to be on, except what if we play king f8, and after that white would not be able to reach the squares that they need to be. And this is a super strong move, the only move that wins the game. So let's take a look how does that work and what does this arrow mean. Now, if king, for example, goes to d5, we push h5, and after take, king g7, and you need 3 moves to get here to defend the pawn while I am almost there. So if you play king e6, try your counterplay, I push, you check, take, here, push, and you are 1 tempo short. Of course losing. Let's go back. So no counterplay, and of course if king e4 you're just late. Very easy win. Let's go back. So no king d5 for you. What happens if king f3? Now you're too far from these squares, from the center. And this is very important to see how black wins here. So we go king e7, king e4, king d6, king d4, and our reserve tempi with h6. And white have to give the black king a square, either or on e5 or c5. Very easy win. We will see similar how we win here. So what left for white? Best try is king e3. The only move, but now we see that this has its drawbacks. King is still close to this, so no h5 works here. Because take here, king f3, and this is draw. We're not going to do this. We will never use our tempo for no need for h6. We're just coming out, king e7. The black king changes direction and heads back to the center. White must come to meet him and take the opposition, but crucially, black still has his reserve tempo in his pocket. Basically the same thing as king f3. King e4, king here, and we used h6. And here it is, black takes the opposition and the white king must give way. King e4. If king c4, we just go to e5 and push. Now the white king is outside the square of the g5 pawn. Take, 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 and of course we're 2 tempo ahead. Let's go back.
மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க.